Thank you for tuning in to another tutorial from Flipping Dust. Today I'm going to be talking to you about painting walls and getting a very crisp line along the top of the wall where it meets the ceiling. Now, a lot of the properties that I work on are kind of old, they're dilapidated, and I'm working on a budget. So I cannot redo the entire ceiling and redo the entire wall to make sure that they meet at perfect level 90-degree angles. What I can do though is draw on my experiences with professional painters, things that I have tinkered around with come to mind, and I'll look at a wall and I'll see where there are dips and valleys where it meets the ceiling. Now, something that I learned is instead of trying to get your paint brush into the corner where the wall and the ceiling meet, sometimes it's good to continue the wall paint up to the ceiling and overlap the ceiling just a little bit. So we're bringing that paint up to the ceiling and into the ceiling, just like maybe a millimeter or two. Now, I don't have the steadiest hands, and that is a point of frustration for me. And maybe some of you have the same experience where you try to get your paintbrush into that corner, you're free-handing it, and you make a mistake, and now you have to go back and fix it. And that can be a real pain. So what I have done, and it gives me a great deal of confidence when I'm working on a property where I know I'm not working with level 90-degree angles, I use a painter's tape and caulking and roller brushes. And my final product is, I'm very pleased with it. Professional painters have commented on the final job when they walk through, like, wow, how did you do this? Because this is a pretty wonky ceiling. And I'll explain to them what I do is I take a painter's tape and I run it along the ceiling. I'm going to show you what I do. I take this painter's tape and I put it up on the ceiling. I'm going to show you how it looks over here. I run the tape along the ceiling and I bring it in about a millimeter. So there's a little teeny gap between the wall and the edge of the ceiling. So I'm painting up onto the ceiling a little bit. Now I'm going to show you the tape that I use. I love to use this frog tape. Excuse the mess, as you know, I'm here flipping houses. That's my real profession, and I love making these tutorials, but you're going to see quite a bit of mess in the background. So what I'm using here is this frog tape. Now I like the yellow one because it's a delicate tape. I try to go through properties quickly, so I've already painted the ceiling, and now I'm going to be painting the walls. I'm putting tape on somewhat freshly painted ceilings. I want to use a delicate tape so it doesn't rip that ceiling paint off. Okay, so I use that tape, I put it along the edge. Now, even though frog tape is a very high quality tape, I find that sometimes there's still a little bit of bleed through, which means that the paint is bleeding underneath the lip of that tape, and then you don't get the best lines. So what I do is I do a very thin bead of caulking, and then I run my finger along that caulking so I smooth it out. It creates a wonderful seal, and then I can take my roller brush and go along the edge. I'm now going to show you some of the products that I use to do what I just described. All right, here we have some of the products that I use. I already showed you the delicate frog tape that I run along the ceiling. Now I'm going to show you something else that I do. I wear nitrile gloves. Now the reason is I'm going to be putting caulking around the edge or on the edge of that tape, and I'm going to be smoothing it out with my finger. I find that the material, the nitrile material, when it's on my finger, creates a very slick surface. So I'm able to run my finger along that tape and I don't hit any snags, and it creates a nice smooth sealing bead. Okay, so I use those gloves. Now, after I've wiped my finger a decent distance, I'll wipe it off on a damp rag. Otherwise, you'll get some buildup of the caulking on your finger. And that's no good because you start to make kind of like these grooves in the caulking, and you can see that when you're done. So I use that rag to wipe my finger. The caulking that I'm using, now this is an interesting point. You want to use the cheapest caulking that you can find. And the reason being is it's not so thick. It has kind of like a gooey but yet watery consistency. That's why I've taped over the brand name here, because I don't want to trash any brand name. But I got the absolute cheapest caulking that I could find at Home Depot, and I find that that works perfect for this type of project. Now I also have a razor, and I'm going to just barely cut off the tip of that caulk so that it gives a very thin bead. You don't want to gunk up the tape with a lot of heavy caulk. Just want a super light, thin coat. Now, I use this type of caulking gun. As you'll notice, it has this kind of like a shock absorber. So when you release that trigger, it pushes back against the clip here, and it releases the pressure from that caulking tube. Otherwise, sometimes you'll just get this kind of like the spouting of the material, and you'll make a mess all over the floor. Now in this situation, I'm flipping a place. I'm gonna be putting in new floors, so I don't really mind if I get too messy, but I wanna show you what it is that I use. Now, I'm using a 5-gallon bucket over here because I'm using an 18-inch roller. Now this roller has this one is a 1/2-inch nap, and I'm also using a 4-inch roller with a 1/2-inch nap. So what I'm going to do is, after I run my bead of caulking along that tape and I smooth it out with my finger, then I'm going to take my 4-inch roller and I'm going to roll it right along that tape. Now, while that paint is wet, I'm going to take my 18-inch roller and do my vertical paint strokes. It's very important that you keep your paint edge wet. Otherwise, you'll start to notice a difference in the brush strokes or the roller strokes. Now also, while I'm doing my paint rolling, I will do a back roll to my stroke. Now what that means, sometimes you're going to hear people on other tutorials saying, oh yeah, we're going to back roll this paint. All that means is you're going in one direction and then you roll it back the other direction. The reason being is you want to really push the paint into the wall. There are going to be different crevices. Let's say you have an orange peel texture, or even a heavier texture. You want to push the paint into all of those little nooks and crannies. Otherwise, when the paint dries, you're going to see all of the original color, or if you have, as I've done here, if you've primed those walls in a white color, you're going to see all those white speckles coming through where your colored paint did not lay down properly. So now that I've described what it is that I'm using, I'm going to show you how I go about doing it. Now I'm going to be trimming off the tip of this tube. I'm just going to do it right here on the counter because I'm replacing this counter. But if you are working in an environment where you don't have a solid surface, you could just use a piece of plywood or something else that you find suitable. Now I'm just going to put this down here and barely cut this tip here. So hopefully you can see just how much I've cut off. Just a teeny bit, because we want to run a very thin bead along the edge of that tape. Now, while we're doing a close-up here, this is the little shock absorber that I was talking about. So when you squeeze this handle, when you release the pressure, see how that pushes back? It releases some of the pressure that's in this tube, so you don't have the material just oozing out and just dropping all over the floor, because that makes quite a mess. Now I'm going to be taking the caulking gun with a caulking tube inside, and I'm just going to be running a little bead along the edge here. I'm not going to show you the entire ceiling because that'll just bore you, but I do want to give you a quick demonstration of how this works. So I take the caulking gun, and I just run a very thin bead. Now, I don't know if you can see how small of a bead that is. Now I take my finger with a nitrile glove on it, and I just smooth it out right along that edge. And then I'll run my finger back the other way. That way I really get the most use out of all of that caulking material that I just put up there. And again, you just want the slightest amount of material in there. And that way it creates a good seal. But you don't want to have too much material because it'll get chunky and it'll get stuck in your roller brush. I've finished putting that bead of caulking now along the edge of the tape, and I want to show you my fingers. So I've used this glove, and you can see how little residue I have on my fingers here. All right, so again, I'm just wiping my finger along that bead of caulking and then wiping it off on a damp rag. But if I was using a big globby amount of caulking, you'd see it all over my hand, but you don't, because I just use the teeniest bit just to seal that edge. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 4-inch roller brush and I'm going to run it along the edge of that tape, and I'm going to back roll it. One thing that I do is I work in sections because you want to keep the tape edge wet. So I'm going to do a section of the 4-inch roller along the tape. Then I'm going to use my 18-inch roller brush to do my vertical lines. Now, one of the reasons I like to use an 18-inch roller brush is because it minimizes the flashing between the brush strokes. Flashing is when you look at a wall and you can see, even after it's dry, where each vertical line was made. It almost looks like lanes on a highway, where you can see a distinct definition between each stroke. So let's say a typical roller brush is 9 inches. An 18-inch brush is going to give you half as many lines vertically on your wall. Another thing that I do is I use a very flat paint, so the light does not reflect off of the paint when it's on the wall. So when it's dry, it's very hard to see where each brush stroke was made. Now I have my 4-inch roller. It's again the 1/2-inch nap on it. And I'm just gonna put it right up to that tape. And I'm gonna roll it back and forth. Now for the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna do this much along the ceiling. Then I'm gonna take my 18-inch roller brush, I'm gonna show you how that works, and then turn the video off, continue with the wall, finish it, and then show you how it looks. You know what, I'm gonna show you on the video how I take the tape off also, because that is important. So let's back up. We did the roller brush along the tape. Now I'm gonna put this roller brush down, and I'm gonna go grab the 18-inch roller. After I turned the camera off, I changed my mind. I decided I'm gonna show you also how I just roll over here into this corner, because I'm gonna be doing this wall the same I'm gonna be painting this wall the same color as this wall. Now I'm just gonna push the edge here of the roller brush into this corner where the two walls meet. And that's gonna give me a nice track for me to roll with the 18-inch roller. So again, I did the ceiling over here. Now I'm rolling down the wall. When I'm going back and forth like this is what's called back rolling. I'm gonna continue down to the floor, then I'm gonna get my 18-inch roller, and I'll show you how that works. So we have our 18-inch roller over here, and I'm gonna load it up with paint. And paint that wall. You can see how I'm going just right up to that 4-inch border that I painted with my smaller roller brush. Because the edge is wet, the two brush strokes are going to blend in together very nicely. I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to continue along on this wall and finish it off. I have now finished rolling the paint on this wall, and it's time to take the tape off. It's important that when you take the tape off, the paint still be wet, because if the paint is already dried, it's going to start to rip the new paint off of the wall. So again, we want to do this when it's still wet. I did not lay this tape down in one continuous strip. I did it in segments. I could not lay it down in one continuous strip because the ceiling has so many dips and valleys and little humps in it. So I had to match each segment of tape to the contours of that ceiling. So now that we're going to be taking the tape off, I put the first layer here, the first strip, and I put a little bit of an edge of the second strip over the original strip. And I continued that pattern down the wall. It makes it very easy then to take the tape off. All you need to do is start with the tape where you started to put it on the ceiling. Ideally, it does come off in one continuous strip. Now, I said I'm going to show you how to take the tape off. There is a little bit of a technique here. You want to keep the front part of the tape ahead of where the tape meets the ceiling. So it's good to stay, let's say, less than a 90-degree angle. 45 degrees is ideal. It doesn't have to be 45 degrees, but again, you want to keep this leading edge in front of the area where the tape is coming off of the ceiling. I'm going to pan the camera over a little bit. Hopefully you're able to see this. I'm doing a one-man show today, and I have nobody to help me with the camera work. Actually, that's how I always do it. If I'm doing a tutorial, it's just me. The rest of the crew is off doing their own thing. So I'm just going to turn the camera this way, and you can see how I take the tape off of the rest of the ceiling. So now I'm going to give you a shot of how it looks now that we have taken the tape off of the ceiling. It's not going to be entirely perfect. Again, this is not a level ceiling where the wall and the ceiling meet at 90 degrees. So keep that in mind as you look at this. You can tell that that is one sharp line. And considering what we were working with ahead of this painting, that is a very, very happy end to a wall painting. If you have any questions about this video, please leave a message in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you'd like to see more tutorials, click the subscribe, like, and notification symbols. Thank you so much for watching Flipping Dust. Happy home improvements, and see you soon.